let's talk about Isaiah Bradley. Otherwise known as the Black Captain America, Isaiah Bradley was conceived in the comics as a clear and deliberate reference to the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study, which, if you don't know, the U.S. Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972 experimented on like 600 poor black sharecroppers from Alabama. They were told they were receiving free medical care, but in fact, they'd been infected with syphilis, and the doctors documented the progression of the disease without treatment. So in the comics, Isaiah Bradley and 300 of his fellow black soldiers were subjected to these like potentially fatal experiments in an attempt to recreate the formula that made Steve Rogers a super soldier. They were all killed to maintain the secrecy of the program, except for Isaiah, who escaped with an old Captain America costume and went on a suicide mission to destroy the Nazi super soldier program. He survived, but he was court-martialed and imprisoned at Leavenworth. How's that for a reward? From his conversation in the show with Bucky, it seems that the MCU version of Isaiah may have enjoyed a longer period of deployment before imprisonment, maybe. But clearly his origin is similar. Now, I just say that, it may be slightly different in the comics because they talked about Bucky meeting him in Korea and him going on missions in Korea, I guess. So that says to me that maybe he went on some, official missions before he was imprisoned. I'm not sure how much that would differ from the comics. But Bob, what was your impression of Isaiah, and how do you think that he is going to fit into the story of the show?
Well, like everything else, it's hard to tell with Marvel. They have a habit of showing you the path to the left and then taking the path to the right. Now, I would doubt that that's the last we see of Isaiah. I think he's definitely going to be in future episodes. To what end? I couldn't even really guess. But one thing they are showing is how a lot of people were treated very unfairly. You have him who was, basically an American hero, did all this stuff for his country, and then at the end of the day was just locked up and poked and prodded and sampled for 30 years.
Yeah, and I think you can see in that scene where they're talking how that really affects Sam, too. Like, because not only is he reeling from the idea that this guy exists, right, in the first place, but the fact that, like, this is what happened to him, I think it really hits home for him in a way. But I interrupted you.
Oh, that's fine. Sam, like you said, Sam is not happy. So not only was this information kept from Sam, but, Sam, who devoted a lot of his life to service, is seeing the country he devoted himself to treat another human being this way. That's not the light you want to see your country in when you've given your life to that country.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, Sam is also dealing with, all of these troubles and the fact that, like, the bank's like, yeah, we're not going to help you. And, all these other troubles when he literally helped save the world on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
And yet this is the thanks that he gets, right? Like, I'm not saying that, like, he should have, like, necessarily, like, some, like, official pension or something because, like, yay, you did that. But, like, shouldn't there at least be, some type of recognition and...
No, if you save the world, like, existence, you get a pension. I mean, come on.
That would be nice, the you save the world pension,
Yeah.
At least like a supplement would be cool. You'd think that society could step in and be like, we appreciate what you did here. But here we have a guy whose situation is even worse than Sam's. I'm not saying Sam's like in the worst position in the world or anything, but he's struggling, He's struggling in his personal life, and society's not there to help him. So he's got, so then he finds out about this guy, and that's got to cut deep, especially since, you have to imagine what Steve would have thought about it if he had known, right? You have to imagine. I mean, Steve was on ice during, like, you know, the whole period that this guy was undergoing his troubles, Isaiah, right? But, you know, I wonder if Steve would have come to, like, visit the guy, if Steve would have tried to help him in some way, you know? I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about. What do you think? Do you think, like, say, after, you know, Steve and Bucky reunited, and whether it was while they were on the run, I guess it would have had to have been while they were on the run, frankly. But do you think Steve would have tried to reach out to this guy?
I mean, if Steve would have known about the guy, I'm sure that over the years, it would be one of the few people that Steve could relate to on that level.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they're you know, even, you know, Steve had a much better time of being enhanced, but psychologically, it's still a heavy burden, and to be able to talk to somebody else with that same burden.
Yeah. 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 I just, you know, I also feel like Steve would have made a little bit of a stink about the fact that this guy got, like, imprisoned for 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Steve would have made all the stink. He would have made it his life's goal to get this dude out.
He probably would have gone to Fury or, you know, just somebody and been like, hey, WTF. You know, obviously he wouldn't have said that. I'm paraphrasing. That's
language.
Yeah. But but anyways, I just find it real interesting. You know, Steve cast such a long shadow, and this, I think throughout this whole show, it's constantly going to be, because I think it has the first 2 episodes, it's constantly going to be begging this question of, like, what would Steve have done? How would Steve have reacted? What would Steve think? Because, you know, it's just such an overt, you know, comparison that it's making to him with the fact that they've created this new Captain America, quote unquote Captain America. You know, like, if it hadn't been for Steve, like, that would not be a thing anymore. You know what I mean? That would have just been some, like, cheesy thing they did during World War II to buy, like, bonds or something. You know what I mean? Like, Steve made that shield mean something. He made that the name Captain America mean something. I mean, it wasn't really a title necessarily before. It was more of, like, a marketing gimmick, I guess.
Yeah, it was all, you know, PR machine.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still a PR machine, the present day PR machine, which in some ways is kind of scary. But, like, it's like, I think that, you know, he's casting this shadow, and we're constantly sort of thinking, at least I'm sort of thinking to myself constantly, like, how would Steve react to this? And I think that that's kind of on Sam's mind too, and it's definitely on Bucky's mind. So, I mean, what's your reaction to that thought that, like, it's constantly, you know, presenting us with this contrast and kind of, I mean, is this something that you've been thinking while watching the show?
Well, one thing that struck me was when you said Steve is casting a very long shadow. And that, I think, is part of Sam's problem. You know, he feels he's not worthy of the shield because he has so much to live up to in the memory of Steve Rogers. Everything Steve Rogers has done in his life for, you know, truth, justice, and the American way, that's a lot to live up to. Super soldier serum or not. I mean, Sam's a regular guy other than the tech. You know, he's not enhanced. He's not a super soldier. And for you, just your regular average guy to be like, hey, you know, here's the shield. Live up to this legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's even more complicated than that in a way, because I don't think this has happened in the actual episodes we've seen yet, but there's a moment in the trailer where they say this shield means a lot of things to a lot of people. And, you know, I think there's a lot you can say about that. And I think you also can't ignore, like, you know, look, the director and the writer have said that they really want, you know, Sam's journey in the show to be connected to, you know, the Black experience in America. And I think that there are some complicated feelings that come up, in that context, with Steve handing over the shield to him as well, and just from Sam's point of view as kind of like a regular guy in Black Man in America, it's like, first of all, coming over from Steve, like, how do you live up to Steve? How do you? And Sam is a good guy. I mean, he doesn't have a huge ego. He doesn't. He's not an arrogant guy. He's kind of a down to earth, sort of ordinary sort of a guy. And how do you feel like you deserve that? How can you feel like you deserve to take on that mantle without an ego? I think we were getting at that in our last episode, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at everything Steve Rogers has done, both before and after his, little ice bath, how could anyone feel up to that?
I don't know. I mean, it's a lot. And I think that's why, I think that's partially why Sam gave it to the Smithsonian. Because also, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing again, I think, but he basically said, there's only one Captain America, and that was Steve Rogers. And, nobody else can really carry that shield with the same meaning behind it. At least that's how he felt. Now, I think Steve thought that Sam could grow into that, which is why he gave it to him instead of anybody else. He didn't give it to Bucky. He didn't give it back to Tony. He didn't say, take this to the, to the Pentagon or to the, to the Smithsonian. He was like, here, he gave it to Sam. And when Sam said it feels like somebody else's, he said it's not.
Well, yeah. And it's not that Steve did it on a whim, because of that whole time travel thing. He had decades to think it over.
He did. He had I think he must have gone back to the 50s.
Yeah.
From the end of Endgame, it looked like. So 70 years he had to think about it, something like that.
Yeah. So it's not like he didn't weigh all his options in that time.
Yeah. So I find that to be real interesting. So, okay, well, I think that's the main stuff that I had about John Walker. So let's move on, shall we? Or sorry, that was we were still talking about Isaiah Bradley, I guess. But I think that to sum up about Isaiah Bradley, at least my thoughts for the limited amount that we've seen him so far, I think that this is another thing that really begs the contrast to Steve Rogers, because this is a guy who was made into a super soldier by the U.S. government, was deployed as an enhanced asset during at least one war, right, that we know about, went up against the Winter Soldier, which, frankly, there probably needed to be guys to go up against the Winter Soldier when he was brainwashed and doing Hydra's dirty work and, being an assassin for the Soviet Union and all. But, to show how, one guy could be treated versus another in a very similar situation where he's given this great gift of being enhanced, one might call it a gift or a curse, but, he's given these abilities, but yet they're treated so differently. And I think that's part of what I'm seeing as the developing theme of this show, that I'm not ready to try and define clearly right now. But I think that, they're going a little deeper with this show than I really expected to. Like, it's giving me a little bit more food for thought than I expected. Because this is going beyond, this is going a little bit beyond just like character. But I like it. I think it brings a depth to the show and it makes it feel more real. And I think it's giving the emotional weight that the show needs, I guess.
Yes.
So do you have any comments on that, or are you ready to move on?
Yeah, Isaiah is, they go to Isaiah for help, and he doesn't want to help. You're asking him to help a world that did nothing but betray him at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to be a part of that world.
Yeah.
He just wants to be left alone.
Yeah, he's like, screw off.
And you can't blame him. I mean, with everything heavy going on, after everything he's been through, you can't blame him for not wanting to be involved.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you know, supposedly he must not have been out of prison for that long. So here we are. Yeah, okay. All right, well, let's move on.